Trembling, Jamal Washington stared at the notification on his phone. All flight staff terminated effective immediately. 24 hours ago, he'd been served moldy food while wearing his casual clothes. Today, in his tailored suit, he'd shown them exactly who runs Skyline Aviation Corporation. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of truth seekers. How would you react if someone served you moldy food because of your skin color? Let's find out what happened next. Jamal Washington adjusted his plain baseball cap lower over his eyes as he settled into Seat 3A of Skyline Airlines Flight 237 from Chicago to New York. At 45, the self-made billionaire and CEO of Skyline Aviation Corporation had developed a habit of flying incognito on his own aircraft. Dressed in faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and well-worn sneakers, he looked nothing like the power player whose face graced the covers of Fortune and Black Enterprise. "This seat is first class," said flight attendant Stephanie Brooks without making eye contact, her voice laced with skepticism as she stood in the aisle beside him. "Yes, I know," Jamal replied evenly, handing over his boarding pass. Stephanie scanned it with narrowed eyes, lips pursed in obvious disapproval. "Very well," she said, dropping the pass onto his tray table rather than handing it back properly. Jamal noted the interaction in his mental log. These mystery passenger evaluations were crucial to maintaining Skyline service standards, especially since he'd built the company on principles of dignity and respect for all travelers. As the cabin filled, Jamal observed Stephanie's interactions with other first-class passengers. Her demeanor transformed completely when addressing the white passengers seated around him. For the elderly white gentleman in 2C, she knelt down to help with his seatbelt. For the white businesswoman in 4B, she offered a warm towel with a genuine smile. Yet when she returned to Jamal's row, her expression hardened, her movements stiff and perfunctory. "Anything to drink before takeoff?" she asked the white passenger beside Jamal in 3B, leaning past him as if he were invisible. "Excuse me," Jamal said politely. "I'd like some water, please." Stephanie's smile vanished. In a moment, she replied, though she had the water pitcher in hand. She served 3 more passengers before returning to him, sloshing water carelessly into his cup. Another flight attendant, Kyle Mitchell, a younger man with kind eyes, seemed to notice the differential treatment. His gaze met Jamal's briefly, apologetic, before he busied himself with pre-flight duties. Once airborne, the real test began with meal service. Jamal discreetly used his phone to document the service process. First-class passengers were offered a choice between chicken pesto pasta and beef tenderloin. When Stephanie reached Jamal, only one option remained. "We're out of the beef," she announced, though Jamal had counted the meals and knew there should be enough for everyone in the small first-class cabin. "The pasta is fine," he said pleasantly. Moments later, she placed his meal before him with a swift, careless motion. Jamal unwrapped his silverware and began to eat, the rich aroma of pesto filling his nostrils. It wasn't until his third bite that he noticed something strange about the underside of the pasta, a bluish-green fuzz spreading across one corner of the dish. Mold. His stomach lurched, but he remained composed, discreetly photographing the contaminated meal. He pushed the tray away and caught Stephanie's attention. "Excuse me, but there's mold on my food," he said quietly, not wanting to create a scene. Stephanie barely glanced at his tray. "I'm sure it's just the pesto sauce, sir," she replied dismissively. "No, it's definitely mold," Jamal insisted, pointing to the fuzzy growth. Kyle, passing by with a drink cart, paused to look. His eyes widened, but before he could speak, Stephanie cut him off. "We'll take care of it," she said sharply. She removed the tray but offered no replacement, no apology. As she walked away, Jamal overheard her mutter to Kyle, "Some people just don't belong in first class. Always looking for something to complain about." Kyle laughed uncomfortably, glancing back at Jamal with what seemed like genuine remorse. By the time the flight began its descent into New York, Jamal was experiencing stomach cramps. He requested to speak with the captain about the food incident, a reasonable request that any passenger might make. The flight attendant call button went unanswered for 20 minutes. When Kyle finally responded, he apologetically informed Jamal that Captain Greg Henderson had said he was too busy preparing for landing to address passenger complaints. "I'm sorry, sir," Kyle whispered, looking genuinely distressed. "I'll file a report myself when we land." Jamal nodded, thanked him, and made notes of this final interaction. As the plane touched down at JFK, he already felt his body temperature rising, likely from the few bites of contaminated food he'd consumed. But despite his physical discomfort, his mind remained sharp, focused on what needed to happen next. After all, he hadn't built Skyline Aviation from nothing by allowing injustice to go unchallenged. The sleek black town car whisked Jamal from JFK to the towering Skyline headquarters in downtown Manhattan. Despite the growing discomfort in his stomach and the slight fever he could feel developing, he maintained his composure. His driver, Thomas, glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "Are you all right, Mr. Washington? You're looking a bit pale." "I'll be fine, Thomas. Just need to take care of some important business." As the car navigated through New York traffic, Jamal's mind drifted to the journey that had brought him here. 20 years ago, he'd been a young aviation engineer with dreams bigger than his bank account. He remembered his first investor meeting, entering a room of white executives who'd looked at him with the same dismissive expression Stephanie had worn today. "An airline? You?" one had scoffed. "Maybe stick to aircraft maintenance." Another had suggested he partner with someone more experienced, a thinly veiled suggestion to find a white face for his company. The rejections had been relentless, the discrimination blatant. But Jamal had persevered, securing funding from a black venture capitalist who recognized his vision. Starting with 2 leased aircraft and regional routes overlooked by major carriers, Skyline Aviation had grown into a billion-dollar enterprise with over 100 planes and routes spanning 5 continents. At every step, Jamal had faced racial barriers. Airport authorities who questioned his credentials despite his ID badge. Competitors who spread rumors about Skyline's safety standards without evidence. Passengers who requested different seats when they saw a black-owned airline on their ticket. Through it all, Jamal had maintained one core principle: Skyline would be different. He implemented rigorous anti-discrimination policies, invested in diversity training, and created systems to ensure all passengers received equal treatment. Or so he had believed. The car pulled up to the gleaming glass tower bearing the Skyline logo. Jamal checked his watch. The executive meeting scheduled for 3 o'clock would be starting soon, a meeting where the crew of Flight 237 was due to receive recognition for their outstanding customer satisfaction scores over the past quarter. "Thank you, Thomas," Jamal said, stepping out of the car. "Please wait for me. This shouldn't take long." In the executive bathroom, Jamal changed quickly, removing his casual disguise. He donned the tailored charcoal suit he kept in his office, along with a crisp white shirt and a tie in Skyline's signature blue. He swallowed 2 antacids to combat the increasing stomach pain and walked purposefully toward the boardroom. His executive assistant, Angela Carter, intercepted him in the hallway, tablet in hand. "The flight crew from 237 is here for their commendation," she said. "They're waiting in the boardroom with the board members. Are you sure you want to do this yourself? HR could handle the disciplinary action." "Some messages need to come from the top," Jamal replied, his voice steady. "Is everything ready?" Angela nodded. "The photos are loaded on the main screen. Legal has reviewed the evidence and confirmed we have grounds for immediate termination." "And the new candidates?" "Already selected from our standby pool. They can start tomorrow." Jamal took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and pushed open the boardroom door. Inside, the atmosphere was jovial. Board members in expensive suits mingled with the uniformed crew of Flight 237. Stephanie Brooks was chatting animatedly with William Fraser, the most senior board member, her hands gesturing enthusiastically as she described something. Captain Greg Henderson stood nearby, chest puffed with pride. Kyle Mitchell lingered at the edge of the group, looking somewhat uncomfortable. None of them noticed Jamal enter and take his seat at the head of the long mahogany table. It was Vice President Diana Torres who first spotted him, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding as she recognized the casual passenger from the flight photographs now displayed on the screen behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diana announced, "I believe our CEO would like to start the meeting." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Jamal. Stephanie's smug expression froze, her gaze darting between Jamal in his impeccable suit and the flight photos on the screen showing him in casual clothes. "Thank you for joining us today," Jamal began, his voice controlled despite the fire in his belly, both literal and figurative. "I believe most of you know me as Jamal Washington, CEO of Skyline Aviation. However, to some of you, I was just another passenger on Flight 237 this morning." He tapped his tablet, and the image on the screen changed to show the moldy pasta he'd been served. A passenger who was served this. Captain Henderson's face drained of color. Kyle Mitchell's eyes widened in horror. But it was Stephanie Brooks whose reaction was most telling, her lips curled in momentary disgust before she composed herself. "Mr. Washington," she began, voice syrupy sweet, "had I known it was you, that's precisely the problem, Ms. Brooks," Jamal cut her off. "You shouldn't need to know who I am to serve me food that won't make me ill. You shouldn't need to know my net worth to treat me with basic human dignity." The room grew tense as the implications sank in. William Fraser cleared his throat, attempting to salvage the situation. "Surely this was just an unfortunate mistake," he suggested. "Food service issues happen on every airline." "Do they?" Jamal asked, tapping his tablet again. The screen displayed side-by-side images. The moldy pasta served to Jamal and the pristine meals served to white passengers in adjacent seats. Then came a video clip, captured discreetly, of Stephanie's differential treatment throughout the flight. "This wasn't a mistake," Jamal stated flatly. "This was a pattern of behavior. A pattern I experienced firsthand, and one that directly contradicts everything Skyline Aviation stands for." Stephanie's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. "You were spying on us," she accused. "I was evaluating our service, as is my right and responsibility as CEO," Jamal corrected. "And what I discovered was deeply disturbing." He stood now, commanding the room despite the increasingly painful cramping in his abdomen. Skyline Aviation was built on the principle that everyone deserves respect in the skies, regardless of their race, gender, or appearance. Today, on my own airline, I was reminded that we still have a long way to go. The boardroom crackled with tension. Jamal remained standing, one hand resting on the polished table surface, the other holding his tablet like a shield. Despite the growing discomfort in his stomach, his voice remained steady. "Let me be absolutely clear about what happened today," he said, addressing the entire room but fixing his gaze on Stephanie Brooks. "I was profiled, dismissed, and ultimately endangered because of assumptions made about me based on my appearance and skin color." Stephanie shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Mr. Washington, with all due respect, you're making serious accusations without." Jamal tapped his tablet again, and the boardroom speakers filled with her own voice. "Some people just don't belong in first class. Always looking for something to complain about." Her words hung in the air, damning in their clarity. The recording continued, capturing her conversation with Kyle about these people and their constant demands. "I have more," Jamal said quietly as the audio ended. "Including my request to speak with the captain about a serious food safety issue, which was denied." Captain Greg Henderson stepped forward, his weathered face flushed. "Flight safety is my primary concern. During landing preparations, I can't be disturbed for food complaints." "Food poisoning is a safety issue, Captain Henderson," Jamal countered, pulling up a medical report on the screen. These are my current symptoms, as documented by our company physician 30 minutes ago. Elevated temperature, abdominal cramping, nausea, all consistent with the early stages of food poisoning. Diana Torres, who had been watching the proceedings with growing concern, spoke up. This goes beyond a service failure. This is a liability issue and, more importantly, a direct violation of our anti-discrimination policies. Stephanie stood abruptly, her uniform jacket pulling tight across her shoulders. You can't possibly think this was about race, she protested, voice rising. It was an honest mistake with the meal. These things happen. You're playing the race card to make a point. A murmur rippled through the board members. William Fraser nodded slightly, seemingly in agreement with Stephanie. Jamal remained perfectly still, his expression unchanging. Is that what you think I'm doing, Ms. Brooks? Using my race as an excuse? Well, if you want the truth, Stephanie began hotly. The truth is, Kyle Mitchell interrupted, surprising everyone as he stepped forward, this wasn't an isolated incident. All eyes turned to the young flight attendant, who swallowed hard before continuing. I've worked with Stephanie for 8 months. I've seen how differently she treats passengers based on their appearance. Today wasn't an exception, it was part of a pattern. Stephanie whirled on him, eyes flashing. You little traitor, she hissed. Should I tell everyone about your little problem with the alcohol miniatures last month? Or how you flirt with the male passengers when you think no one's watching? Kyle flinched but stood his ground. Go ahead. I made a mistake and reported it myself. I've been in counseling for stress management. But that has nothing to do with what you did today, and all the other days. Diana nodded encouragingly at Kyle, then addressed the room. As a Latina executive, I've experienced similar treatment, being mistaken for cleaning staff in our own offices, having my authority questioned. What happened to Jamal today reflects a deeper issue in our company culture, one we've clearly failed to address effectively. One of the older board members, Harold Jenkins, cleared his throat. This all seems rather subjective. Perhaps Mr. Washington was simply having a bad day and interpreted normal service variations as discrimination. There's nothing normal about serving moldy food, Jamal responded, his voice still measured. There's nothing normal about ignoring a passenger's legitimate health concerns. But to fire an entire crew over one incident? Fraser interjected. That seems excessive, especially given Skyline's current market position. We can't afford negative publicity. What we can't afford, Jamal countered, is to compromise the principles this company was built on. Would you be making the same argument if I were white, Mr. Fraser? The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Fraser's face reddened, but before he could respond, Captain Henderson slammed his hand on the table. This is ridiculous. 30 years of flying, and I'm being called racist because some executive played dress up and didn't like his pasta. He turned to the board members. This is reverse discrimination, plain and simple. He's targeting us because we're white. The room erupted. Board members began talking over one another, some defending Jamal, others questioning whether the incident was being blown out of proportion. Through it all, Stephanie stood rigid, her expression alternating between defiance and calculation, while Kyle looked increasingly uncomfortable. Jamal let the chaos continue for precisely 1 minute before raising his hand. Gradually, the room quieted. This isn't about one incident, he said, his voice somehow softer yet more commanding. This is about who we are as a company. When I founded Skyline, I was told repeatedly that a black man couldn't succeed in this industry. Every step of the way, I've faced the kind of attitude displayed on my flight today. I built this airline specifically to break that pattern. He looked each board member in the eye before continuing. So no, Mr. Fraser, this isn't excessive. This is necessary. And to answer your concern about publicity, what do you think would happen if word got out that Skyline's own CEO was racially profiled and served moldy food on his own airline? That the captain refused to address a legitimate safety concern. Fraser had no response to that. Jamal turned to Diana. I want a full investigation. Every complaint filed against these crew members, every customer satisfaction survey. I want to know if this is a pattern or a terrible exception. You'll have it by morning, Diana promised. As the meeting adjourned, Stephanie approached Jamal, her manner suddenly conciliatory. Mr. Washington, I hope we can discuss this privately. I'm sure we can come to some understanding that doesn't require such drastic action. The implication was clear, and Jamal felt a fresh wave of disgust that had nothing to do with his upset stomach. MS. Brooks, you'll be hearing from HR regarding next steps. Until then, your access to Skyline facilities has been suspended. As security arrived to escort the crew members out, Jamal caught Kyle's eye and gave him a slight nod. The young man's shoulders relaxed just slightly, his relief visible as he realized his honesty would not go unrecognized. The confrontation was over, but Jamal knew the real work was just beginning. The morning after the boardroom confrontation, Jamal arrived at Skyline headquarters despite his physician's recommendation to rest. The food poisoning symptoms had intensified overnight, leaving him exhausted and dehydrated, but he refused to let physical discomfort derail what needed to be done. You look terrible, Diana Torres said bluntly as she entered his office carrying a thick folder and a flash drive. Should you even be here? Probably not, Jamal admitted, accepting the ginger tea his assistant had prepared. But this can't wait. What did you find? Diana placed the folder on his desk. More than we expected. Marcus from HR has been working through the night. He'll be joining us shortly with his full report. As if summoned, Marcus Bailey, Skyline's Human Resources Director, appeared in the doorway. The normally impeccable executive looked disheveled, his tie slightly askew, dark circles under his eyes. Sorry for the appearance, he said, placing another, even thicker folder beside Diana's. Once we started digging, we couldn't stop. Tell me, Jamal said simply. Marcus opened his folder. We found 27 formal complaints against Stephanie Brooks in the past 18 months. All from passengers of color, all describing similar patterns of dismissive or outright hostile treatment. 27. Jamal echoed, stunned. How did this not trigger our review protocols? Marcus looked uncomfortable. That's where it gets complicated. Each complaint was marked as resolved in our system. The passengers received apology emails, vouchers for future flights. But there's no record of any disciplinary action or even a performance discussion with Brooks. Who processed these complaints? Diana asked, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. They were all routed to Captain Henderson as her direct supervisor, Marcus confirmed. He dismissed every single one as passenger misunderstanding or cultural differences in service expectations. Jamal rubbed his temples, fighting both anger and nausea. And no one questioned this pattern. 2 junior HR associates did flag it, Marcus said. Both times, their concerns were overruled by senior management. By whom specifically? Jamal pressed. Marcus hesitated, glancing at the closed door before answering. By William Fraser. The room fell silent as the implication sank in. Fraser wasn't just a board member, he was Jamal's longtime colleague, one of Skyline's earliest investors. There's more, Diana said, inserting the flash drive into Jamal's computer. Our IT team recovered these from the company's server archives. Emails appeared on the screen, dozens of them, exchanged between Greg Henderson and Stephanie Brooks. The language was careful, coded, but the meaning became clear as Jamal read through them. Service adjustment for 4C, followed by a passenger name that sounded Middle Eastern. Special handling required for 2A and 2B, attached to reservations for passengers with clearly African American names. VIP treatment for 1D only, corresponding to the only white passenger in a first-class row. They developed a code system, Diana explained unnecessarily. A way to flag certain passengers for differential treatment without explicitly mentioning race. Jamal's stomach churned with something beyond food poisoning. How widespread is this? We're still determining that, Marcus said. But late last night, another flight attendant came forward. Zoe Jackson. On cue, a young black woman appeared in the doorway. Tall and poised in her Skyline uniform, she clutched a tablet to her chest like armor. Ms. Jackson, Jamal greeted her, gesturing to an empty chair. Thank you for being here. I understand you have information for us. Zoe sat stiffly, her professionalism barely masking her nervousness. Yes, sir. After what happened yesterday, after hearing how Kyle spoke up, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. She handed her tablet to Diana, who connected it to the main screen. A messaging app opened, displaying a group labeled Real Sky Talk. This is a private group chat for certain crew members, Zoe explained. I was added 6 months ago when I started working premium routes. They said it was for crew coordination, but it's really. She trailed off as Diana scrolled through the messages. Racist jokes. Mocking photos of passengers taken without consent. Derogatory comments about affirmative action travelers who didn't belong in first class. Suggestions for making certain passengers so uncomfortable they wouldn't book Skyline again. Jamal read in silence, each message making his blood pressure rise. Most disturbing were the participants. Not just Stephanie and Greg, but nearly 20 other crew members, including 2 other captains. Why didn't you report this sooner? He asked quietly, not accusatory but genuinely curious. Zoe met his gaze directly. I tried, sir. I went to HR twice. Both times I was told it was just venting and not actionable. The second time, I was removed from international routes for not being a team player. It was clear what would happen if I pushed harder. Jamal nodded, understanding all too well. And Kyle? How does he fit into this? Kyle was added to the group when he started, Zoe explained. But he never participated actively. He'd occasionally like a harmless message about schedule changes, probably to avoid suspicion, but he never engaged with the problematic content. As if on cue, Jamal's phone buzzed with a message from security. Kyle Mitchell had arrived for his requested meeting. Send him up, Jamal instructed. While they waited, Diana pulled up additional findings. We've also discovered something interesting about Stephanie Brooks. She's William Fraser's wife's niece. He personally recommended her for the position 3 years ago, bypassing our standard hiring protocols. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more disturbing than Jamal had anticipated. This wasn't just about one crew or one incident, it was about a systemic failure that had taken root under his watch. Kyle entered, looking pale but determined. Without his uniform, in simple jeans and a button-down shirt, he seemed younger, more vulnerable. I have something you should see, he said without preamble, holding out his phone. Private messages between Stephanie and me. And between Greg and the crew. I've been documenting everything for months, trying to gather enough evidence before speaking up. As they reviewed Kyle's evidence, a clear pattern emerged of targeted discrimination, carefully concealed behind corporate jargon and procedural excuses. Most disturbing were messages showing William Fraser's active role in suppressing complaints and protecting problematic employees. Everyone is talking about what happened with Jamal Washington and the flight crew that served him moldy food because of racial bias. The investigation has revealed even more disturbing evidence of systematic discrimination at Skyline Aviation. I want to know what you think. Comment number 1 if you believe Jamal is right to fire the entire crew, or comment number 2 if you think he's overreacting. Don't forget to like and subscribe to follow this shocking story. With board member William Fraser implicated in covering up discrimination complaints, what do you think will happen when this scandal goes public? Let's find out. By noon the next day, despite Skyline's efforts to handle the situation internally, news of the incident had leaked. A junior employee, witnessing Stephanie and Greg being escorted from the building, had posted about it on Twitter. Within hours, the story had morphed and expanded, picking up details both accurate and imagined. Breaking. Black Airline CEO served moldy food on own plane, fires entire crew. The headline blazed across social media platforms, accompanied by a grainy smartphone photo of Jamal in his casual clothes, looking at the contaminated meal. No one knew who had taken or leaked the image, but its impact was immediate and explosive. #MoldyBias began trending nationwide by mid-afternoon. Jamal sat in his office, watching the social media storm unfold on the monitors Angela had set up. His phone hadn't stopped ringing, calls from major news outlets, industry colleagues, civil rights organizations, all wanting a statement, an interview, an exclusive. "Our stock has dropped 12 points since the market opened," Diana reported, entering with fresh analytics. "The board is panicking." "Let them panic," Jamal replied, scrolling through the Twitter hashtag. "We're doing what's right, not what's expedient." Angela appeared in the doorway. "Sir, Stephanie Brooks is giving a live interview on Channel 4 right now." Jamal unmuted one of the monitors, where Stephanie, eyes teary, voice trembling, was recounting her version of events. "It was an honest mistake that could have happened to anyone," she insisted. "One bad meal out of hundreds served perfectly that day. But because Mr. Washington is on some social justice crusade, my 20-year career is over. I'm being scapegoated to make him look like a hero." The interviewer, a sympathetic blonde woman, nodded gravely. "And you had no idea he was the CEO?" "Of course not. I treat all passengers with respect, regardless of who they are. This isn't about race, it's about a powerful man using one incident to make a point at the expense of working people's livelihoods." Before the interview ended, another monitor showed Captain Henderson appearing on a conservative news channel, angrily denouncing what he called reverse discrimination and woke culture run amok. "Washington has been looking for an excuse to clean house and replace experienced staff with his diversity hires," Henderson claimed. "This gave him the perfect opportunity. He didn't just fire me and Stephanie. He terminated the entire crew, including people who weren't even in first class that day." Diana muted the monitors. "They're playing this well, painting themselves as victims. We need to respond." "Not yet," Jamal said, his expression thoughtful. "Let's see how this unfolds. The truth has a way of emerging." And emerge it did, though not in the way Jamal had expected. By evening, multiple news outlets had begun digging into his background, searching for anything that might undermine his credibility. They found the opposite. Former employees came forward, sharing stories of Jamal's fairness and integrity. Passengers recounted instances where he'd personally addressed their concerns. Business publications highlighted Skyline's industry-leading diversity initiatives and exceptional safety record. But the coverage wasn't universally positive. Conservative outlets questioned Jamal's motives, suggesting he was capitalizing on race politics to distract from Skyline's recent minor drop in quarterly earnings. Online comment sections filled with racist vitriol. Anonymous accounts posted Jamal's home address and contact information, forcing him to relocate his family temporarily. The death threats began arriving by nightfall. "You should take some time off," Diana suggested as security escorted Jamal to a waiting car, a protective detail now necessary for his safety. "Let me handle this until things cool down." Jamal shook his head. "That's exactly what they want, for me to disappear, to show weakness. I didn't back down when banks refused to fund my airline because of my skin color. I won't back down now." Back in his temporary apartment, secured by Skyline's security team, Jamal reviewed the day's developments with his inner circle. The story had clearly split public opinion along racial and political lines, with each side becoming increasingly entrenched. Most concerning were the messages coming in from Skyline's major clients and partners. Some expressed solidarity and support, but others, particularly in more conservative regions, threatened to pull their contracts if the situation wasn't resolved appropriately. They want us to reinstate Stephanie and Greg, Angela translated, reading between the lines of a particularly diplomatic email from a major corporate client. To smooth this over and move on. Not going to happen, Jamal said firmly. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Check your email. You need to see this. Kyle, in his inbox, Jamal found a video file with no message. He played it on his secure laptop, the others gathering around to watch. It was William Fraser, clearly intoxicated at what appeared to be a private executive retreat from the previous year. He was speaking to a small group of older white men, all in golf attire. Washington's diversity obsession is costing us, Fraser slurred in the video. All these sensitivity trainings and special accommodations. You know what I told him? I said, Jamal, you can play the race card all you want, but this is still a white man's industry. We're just letting you rent some space in it. The men around him laughed appreciatively. The video continued for another 2 minutes, capturing increasingly explicit racist comments about Jamal, other minority executives, and Skyline's diverse customer base. Where did Kyle get this? Diana asked when it ended. Does it matter? Angela countered. This is the smoking gun we needed. Jamal sat back, processing this new information. Fraser had been one of his earliest supporters, or so he'd thought. The betrayal stung, but it also clarified his path forward. We use this carefully, he decided. Not as a weapon, but as leverage. Fraser isn't the only problem, he's a symptom of a culture that existed before I bought my first plane. We need systemic change, not just individual consequences. As the night wore on, the media storm intensified. News vans camped outside Skyline headquarters. Industry analysts debated the company's future on financial shows. Social media users picked sides, the hashtag evolving into various factions, hashtag Stand With Skyline versus hashtag Boycott Skyline, hashtag Jamal was right versus hashtag Skyline Too Woke. Through it all, Jamal maintained his silence publicly, focusing instead on gathering evidence and planning his next move. He knew from building Skyline that sometimes the loudest voice wasn't the most effective. It was the most prepared one. And as dawn broke on the third day of the crisis, bringing news that William Fraser had called an emergency board meeting without Jamal's knowledge, it became clear that preparation would be his only advantage in the battle to come. The Skyline Aviation boardroom had never felt so hostile. Jamal sat at the head of the table, outwardly calm despite the obvious coup attempt unfolding before him. William Fraser had orchestrated this emergency meeting with ruthless efficiency, gathering his allies before Jamal could fully prepare. The purpose of this meeting, Fraser announced, standing to address the board, is to discuss the leadership crisis currently threatening our company's existence. Leadership crisis? Jamal repeated, his voice even. That's an interesting characterization of holding staff accountable for discriminatory behavior. Fraser's smile didn't reach his eyes. What I'm referring to, Jamal, is your handling of what should have been a routine customer service issue. Instead, you've created a public relations nightmare that has wiped nearly $200 million from our market capitalization in just 2 days. He distributed tablets to each board member, displaying real-time stock charts, media coverage analyses, and customer sentiment metrics, all pointing towards significant damage to Skyline's brand. Our primary responsibility is to our shareholders, Fraser continued, his voice taking on a rehearsed gravity. And right now, your personal crusade is destroying shareholder value. 3 board members nodded in agreement. Harold Jenkins, the company's oldest director, cleared his throat. While we all support diversity in principle, perhaps this situation has been overhandled. Overhandled? Diana Torres interjected, her voice sharp with disbelief. We discovered a systematic pattern of racial discrimination perpetrated by employees and actively covered up by management. How exactly should that be handled? With discretion, replied Eliza Montgomery, another director aligned with Fraser. Private reprimands, additional training, perhaps reassignment. Not public terminations that invite media scrutiny and damage our brand. Jamal listened to the exchange, noting which directors seemed genuinely concerned about the company versus those clearly in Fraser's pocket. The division was roughly even, with 2 directors remaining conspicuously silent, likely waiting to see which way the wind would blow before committing. "Let's be honest about what's happening here," Jamal said finally. "This isn't about shareholder value or public relations. This is about whether Skyline Aviation truly stands behind its stated values of dignity and respect for all." Fraser scoffed. "Very inspiring, Jamal. But idealism doesn't keep planes in the air. We have major clients threatening to pull their corporate contracts. We have airports in 3 southern states reviewing our gate agreements. We have travel agencies fielding cancellation requests. All problems that can be addressed once we've corrected our internal issues," Jamal countered. "The simplest solution," Fraser suggested, his tone falsely reasonable, "would be for you to step back temporarily. Take a leave of absence while the board handles this situation more judiciously." And there it was, the real purpose of this meeting. Not just to undermine Jamal's actions, but to remove him entirely. Diana straightened in her chair. "That's absurd. Jamal built this company from nothing. The Skyline brand is inseparable from his vision and leadership. A brand that's now toxic in many markets," Fraser argued. "For the good of the company he claims to love, Jamal should recognize when his presence has become a liability." Several directors murmured in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Jamal took a slow, deliberate sip of water, using the moment to center himself. "Is there a formal motion on the table, Mr. Fraser?" Fraser exchanged glances with his allies before responding. "I move that Jamal Washington take a 6-month leave of absence, during which time the board will appoint an interim CEO and resolve the current public relations crisis." "I second the motion," Harold Jenkins added immediately. "Before we vote," Jamal said calmly, "I'd like to remind the board of several relevant facts." He tapped his tablet, and the room's main screen displayed Skyline's original founding documents. "First, while we are a publicly traded company, I maintain controlling interest through various holdings and investment structures. Specifically, I control 53% of voting shares." Fraser's confident expression faltered slightly. "Those shares are held in trust and managed by the board collectively." "Actually," Jamal continued, "they're managed according to the terms specified in our corporate charter, which requires a 70% board majority to override founder decisions on matters of corporate culture and personnel." Diana allowed herself a small smile as Fraser's face reddened. "Second," Jamal went on, "I'd like to address the financial concerns. While our stock has indeed taken a short-term hit, our core metrics remain strong. More importantly, early data shows bookings from minority customers have increased 23% since this story broke, suggesting a significant segment of the market supports our stance against discrimination." He changed the display to show real-time booking analytics. "Third, and perhaps most relevant to today's discussion, is this." The screen switched to the video of Fraser making racist comments at the executive retreat. The room fell silent as Fraser's own voice filled the air, making disparaging remarks about diversity hires and playing the race card. When it ended, Fraser's face had gone from red to ashen. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. "Does it matter?" Jamal asked, echoing Angela's earlier question. "What matters is whether it represents your actual views, and whether those views are compatible with Skyline's mission." Fraser glanced desperately around the table, finding several formerly friendly faces now avoiding his gaze. "That was taken out of context," he protested weakly. "I'd had a few drinks. We were just joking around." "Racism isn't a joke," Diana stated flatly. "Not at Skyline." Jamal stood, commanding the room's attention. "I founded this airline because I was told a black man couldn't succeed in this industry. Every step of the way, I've faced the kind of attitudes displayed in that video and on my flight 3 days ago. I built Skyline specifically to break that pattern, to create an airline where everyone is treated with respect. He looked each board member in the eye before continuing. I will not take a leave of absence. I will not reinstate employees who discriminated against passengers. And I will not allow Skyline to prioritize short-term stock prices over our core values. The room remained tense as Jamal laid out his counterproposal, a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints, enhanced training protocols, and a new board committee focused specifically on ensuring equitable treatment of all passengers and employees, to be chaired by Diana Torres. Additionally, he concluded, I believe Mr. Fraser's position on this board has become untenable given his demonstrated views and his active role in suppressing discrimination complaints. Fraser shot to his feet. You can't remove me. I've been on this board since the beginning. My connections, my influence, you'd be nothing without me. Actually, Diana interjected, according to Bylaw 17.3, the board can vote to remove any member whose actions are deemed detrimental to the company's interests. Given the evidence presented today, I'd say that standard has been met. Fraser's eyes darted wildly around the room, assessing his rapidly diminishing support. This isn't over, he hissed. I have friends in this industry. Powerful friends. You think this little PR crisis is bad? You haven't seen anything yet. Jamal remained composed. Is that a threat, Mr. Fraser? Before Fraser could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced down, his expression shifting from anger to shock. Something wrong? Jamal inquired mildly. Fraser didn't answer, but another board member's phone buzzed, then another. Soon the entire room was checking their devices. Diana turned her tablet toward Jamal. On the screen was a breaking news alert, exclusive, recording reveals Skyline board members' racist comments about CEO. Someone had leaked the video. As Fraser realized what had happened, his facade crumbled completely. You planned this, he accused, pointing a trembling finger at Jamal. You manipulated this entire situation. No, William, Jamal replied quietly. You did that yourself, every time you chose to protect discrimination rather than address it. Every time you pretended not to see what was happening right in front of you. The emergency board meeting adjourned 30 minutes later with two significant outcomes, William Fraser's immediate removal from the board, and unanimous support for Jamal's action plan moving forward. As the directors filed out, some still looking shell-shocked by the day's revelations, Diana lingered behind. You didn't leak that video, did you? She asked once they were alone. Jamal shook his head. I have no idea who did. But whoever it was, they just helped us turn a corner that was long overdue. Outside the boardroom windows, the New York skyline stretched toward a horizon that suddenly seemed more promising than it had in days. The battle wasn't over, Fraser's threats couldn't be dismissed entirely, but the path forward was clearer now. Skyline Aviation would emerge from this crisis not by compromising its values, but by recommitting to them more deeply than ever before. The day after Fraser's removal from the board, Jamal received a text message from an unknown number, need to talk. Not safe at office. Central Park, Bethesda Fountain, 2 p.m. Come alone. Kyle, despite his security team's objections, Jamal insisted on keeping the meeting, though he compromised by allowing an undercover bodyguard to maintain distance while he sat on a bench near the iconic fountain. Kyle arrived precisely at 2, looking nervously over his shoulder before sitting beside Jamal. Gone was his uniform, replaced by a nondescript hoodie and jeans that seemed designed to avoid attention. Thank you for coming, Kyle said, his voice low. I wasn't sure you would. You took a risk speaking up in that boardroom, Jamal replied. The least I can do is hear what you have to say now. Kyle glanced around once more before pulling out a small external hard drive from his pocket. This contains information you need to see. But I need your word that you'll protect me. Fraser has connections everywhere, and what's on here, it's worse than what you already know. Jamal accepted the drive, tucking it securely into his inner jacket pocket. You have my protection, Kyle. What am I looking at here? Evidence of a systematic discrimination program that goes back years, Kyle explained, his words coming faster now, as if he feared losing his nerve. It wasn't just Stephanie and Greg. It wasn't even just Fraser. There's a whole network of executives and crew members who've been targeting minority passengers. For what purpose? Jamal asked, struggling to understand the scope of what Kyle was suggesting. Initially, I think it was just personal prejudice. But over time, it became more organized. They called it passenger profile optimization, a system to discourage certain types of customers from flying Skyline regularly. By treating them poorly, Jamal concluded, disgust evident in his voice. Kyle nodded. The theory was that if first-class and premium routes were kept, well, white, the airline would attract more high-value customers from certain demographics. That's not just discriminatory, it's terrible business, Jamal noted. Diverse customers represent trillions in spending power. Try telling that to Fraser, Kyle replied. On the drive, you'll find spreadsheets tracking what they called customer retention targeting. It categorizes passengers by perceived ethnicity and recommends service levels designed to either retain or discourage repeat business. Jamal's mind raced, connecting dots from various customer satisfaction metrics that had puzzled him over the years. How deep does this go? 27 crew members across 15 routes, for executives including Fraser, and at least 2 other board members, Kyle said, confirming Jamal's worst fears. They recruited me when I started on premium routes last year. At first, I played along because I needed the job, but I've been documenting everything since I realized what was happening. The video of Fraser, that was you? Kyle nodded. I didn't leak it though. I just included it on a thumb drive I gave to Zoe for safekeeping. She must have decided it needed to go public. Why come forward now? Jamal asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Because it was wrong, Kyle said simply. And because watching you stand up to them made me realize I couldn't be part of it anymore, no matter the consequences. As they spoke, Jamal's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Angela, Fraser trying to access secure servers. IT blocking. Call immediately. We need to move fast, Jamal told Kyle, standing. Fraser knows he's exposed and he's getting desperate. Back at his temporary office, a secure suite at a midtown hotel, Jamal gathered his crisis team. Angela confirmed that Fraser had attempted to remotely access Skyline servers, presumably to delete incriminating evidence. He failed, but it shows he's panicking, she noted. And he's not alone. Several executives implicated in Kyle's evidence have suddenly requested emergency vacation time. Diana examined the files from Kyle's hard drive, her expression growing darker with each folder she opened. This is methodical. They created an entire shadow operation within our company. Most disturbing was a folder labeled Financial Impacts, containing documentation of how Fraser had personally profited from the discriminatory system. By reducing service quality for targeted passengers, he had created artificial cost savings that triggered his performance bonuses while simultaneously directing premium customers toward partner businesses in which he held financial interests. He wasn't just a racist, Diana concluded. He was using racism to enrich himself at the company's expense. As the team worked through the night to understand the full scope of the conspiracy, Zoe Jackson arrived with additional evidence, recordings she'd made at executive social events where Fraser and his allies had spoken openly about their passenger strategy, when they thought only sympathetic ears were listening. In one particularly damning clip, Fraser could be heard explaining to a new hire. We're not saying don't serve them. We're just saying serve them in a way that ensures they choose another airline next time. It's just business, not personal. By dawn, Jamal had assembled an airtight case against not just Fraser, but an entire network of employees who had participated in or enabled the discrimination scheme. Working with Skyline's legal team, he prepared for the most significant restructuring in the company's history. But first, he had a more immediate threat to neutralize. Fraser's desperate server access attempt suggested he might try to destroy evidence or even sabotage Skyline operations. Security protocols were enhanced across all systems, and physical security at Skyline facilities was doubled. The precautions proved prescient when, just after noon, Angela intercepted threatening messages Fraser had sent to Kyle, warning of consequences if he continued cooperating with Jamal. "He knows Kyle gave us the evidence," Angela reported grimly. "And he's not just making empty threats. We've detected attempts to access Kyle's personal accounts, his rental history, even his medical records. Move Kyle to secure housing immediately," Jamal ordered. "And get me everything we have on Fraser's financial dealings. If he's threatening our people, we need to end this now." Working with forensic accountants, Jamal's team discovered that Fraser's corruption extended beyond the discrimination scheme. He had been skimming from executive expense accounts, directing Skyline contracts to companies owned by family members, and manipulating maintenance schedules to reduce costs in ways that, while not explicitly unsafe, certainly pushed ethical boundaries. With this new evidence in hand, Jamal made a calculated decision. Rather than waiting for Fraser to make his next move, he would take the offensive. Through a trusted journalist who had covered Skyline fairly in the past, Jamal strategically leaked selected documents showing Fraser's financial improprieties, nothing related to the discrimination investigation, which would be handled internally, but enough to ensure Fraser would be too busy defending himself to continue his attacks on Skyline and its employees. The story broke that evening: former Skyline board member under investigation for financial misconduct. Within hours, Fraser's other business associates began distancing themselves, and regulatory authorities announced preliminary inquiries into his activities. "That should keep him occupied," Diana observed as they watched the coverage. "But it's just a temporary diversion. The real battle is still ahead." Jamal nodded, his focus already shifting to the comprehensive plan he developed to cleanse Skyline of the discriminatory system that had taken root under his nose. It would require more than just firing the guilty parties. It would demand a fundamental restructuring of how the airline operated, from crew assignment algorithms to complaint processing to executive oversight. "Tomorrow," he told his team as they finally prepared to get some rest, "we take back our airline." As he left the office, Jamal's phone buzzed with a message from Kyle: "Thank you for the protection. No matter what happens next, I'm glad I spoke up." For the first time in days, Jamal allowed himself a genuine smile. The crisis was far from over, but a turning point had been reached. Fraser and his allies had believed they could use discrimination as a business strategy and intimidation as a shield. They were about to learn how thoroughly they had miscalculated. The Skyline Aviation headquarters gleamed in the morning sunlight as Jamal's car pulled up to the entrance. News vans lined the street, reporters poised with microphones and cameras. Jamal had called a board meeting for 9 o'clock sharp, and the unprecedented decision to invite press representatives to wait outside had sparked intense speculation. "Are you sure about this approach?" Diana asked as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. "Once we start this, there's no turning back." "That's precisely the point," Jamal replied. "No more hiding, no more gradual reforms. Today we draw a line that makes our values crystal clear to everyone, our employees, our customers, and the entire industry." The boardroom was already filled when they entered. Every director was present, along with Skyline's legal team, key executives, and, most notably, Kyle Mitchell and Zoe Jackson, both looking uncomfortable but determined in the formal setting. Conspicuously absent were William Fraser and his closest allies, though an empty chair had been pointedly left at the table. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. "Thank you all for coming," Jamal began, standing tall despite the fatigue of the past sleepless days. "What I'm about to share will be difficult to hear, but essential for Skyline's future." For the next 30 minutes, he methodically presented the evidence gathered from Kyle's hard drive, Zoe's recordings, and the forensic investigation. Displays showed the passenger profile optimization, spreadsheets, the coded communications, the deliberate suppression of complaints, and the financial benefits that had flowed to Fraser and his confederates. This wasn't just a few employees with personal biases, Jamal explained. This was a coordinated system designed to discriminate against passengers of color while enriching certain executives and board members. The room remained silent as the magnitude of the betrayal sank in. Even directors who had initially sided with Fraser looked stunned by the comprehensive evidence. Most disturbing, Jamal continued, is how this discrimination potentially compromised passenger safety. He displayed maintenance records showing that flights with higher percentages of minority passengers had been subtly deprioritized for certain non-critical but comfort-enhancing maintenance procedures. Cabin temperature regulation, seat recline mechanisms, entertainment system updates, all were scheduled less frequently for aircraft primarily serving routes with more diverse demographics. Diana stepped forward to present the financial analysis. Our audit reveals approximately $27 million diverted through Fraser's network of companies over the past 5 years, all while creating artificial performance metrics that triggered executive bonuses. As the presentation concluded, Harold Jenkins, once Fraser's reliable ally, looked visibly shaken. "How did we miss this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because it was designed to be missed," Jamal answered simply. "It operated in the shadow of our legitimate operations, using our own corporate language and structures to hide in plain sight." He turned to Kyle, who sat nervously at the far end of the table. "Mr. Mitchell has agreed to provide his first-hand testimony about how this system functioned and the pressure applied to employees to participate." Kyle stood, cleared his throat, and began describing his experience in a voice that started shakily but grew stronger. He explained how new flight attendants were subtly tested with small discriminatory actions before being recruited into the full system, how captains like Greg Henderson enforced compliance through schedule punishments and performance reviews, and how Fraser had created a culture of fear to maintain silence. "I'm not blameless," Kyle admitted. "I went along with it at first. I needed the job, and speaking up seemed impossible. But watching Mr. Washington stand up to them, watching him choose principles over expediency, made me realize I had to do the same, whatever the cost." Before Kyle could continue, the boardroom door burst open. William Fraser stormed in, followed by his attorney, his face flushed with rage. "This is a witch hunt," he shouted. "You have no right to hold this meeting without proper notice to all board members." Jamal remained calm. "You were notified, William. Your removal from the board doesn't eliminate your right to defend yourself against these allegations." Fraser's eyes darted around the room, taking in the displays of evidence still visible on the screens. "Whatever this disgruntled employee has told you is hearsay and fabrication," he insisted, pointing accusingly at Kyle. "Mitchell was reprimanded for alcohol theft last month. He's retaliating with lies." Kyle flinched but held his ground. "I made a mistake and reported it myself. You're the one who tried to use it as leverage to keep me quiet." Fraser laughed harshly. "Oh, shall we talk about mistakes? Like your little problem with prescription medications during college? Or that DUI you managed to get expunged from your record? Does everyone here know who they're trusting?" A murmur ran through the room as Kyle paled. Fraser had clearly been digging into his past, looking for anything to discredit him. But before the moment could spiral further, Jamal stepped forward. "Kyle's past is irrelevant to the evidence at hand. What matters is his courage in coming forward now, despite knowing you would attempt exactly this kind of character assassination." "Courage?" Fraser scoffed. "He's a failed pilot who couldn't cut it in training and ended up serving drinks instead. Now he's trying to save his mediocre career by playing hero." "That's enough," Diana interrupted sharply. "This isn't about Kyle's background. This is about systematic discrimination that you orchestrated and profited from." Fraser's attorney placed a restraining hand on his client's arm, whispering something urgently, but Fraser shook him off. "You have nothing," he insisted. A few disgruntled employees, some out-of-context recordings, and creative interpretations of standard business practices. Meanwhile, Washington's crusade has cost shareholders millions in market value. If anyone should be investigated, it's him. Jamal exchanged a glance with Diana, who nodded almost imperceptibly. It was time for the final revelation. Actually, Jamal said quietly, we have something more definitive than testimonies or recordings. He nodded to Angela, who tapped her tablet. The room's main screen displayed a complex financial diagram showing money flowing from Skyline through various shell companies and eventually to offshore accounts controlled by Fraser. Our forensic accountants have been working around the clock, Jamal explained. They've traced every dollar you diverted through your passenger optimization program. Every maintenance budget you cut on routes serving predominantly minority communities. Every bonus you collected based on artificially inflated performance metrics. Fraser's face drained of color as he recognized his own financial structure mapped out in damning detail. This morning, Jamal continued, I filed formal reports with the SEC, the Department of Transportation, and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The evidence has been secured on multiple servers beyond your reach. Fraser's attorney was now urgently trying to pull his client from the room, but Fraser remained rooted in place, his expression shifting from shock to cold fury. You self-righteous hypocrite, he spat at Jamal. You think you've won? I built the relationships that keep this airline flying. Half our route approvals came through my connections. The major corporate accounts respect me, not some affirmative action success story who got lucky. The slur hung in the air, confirming everything the investigation had revealed about Fraser's true character. Diana stood, her posture rigid with controlled anger. I move for the immediate termination of all commercial relationships with William Fraser, his family members, and any business entities under their control. Seconded, said Jenkins, his earlier uncertainty replaced by firm resolve. All in favor? Jamal asked. Every hand in the room rose, creating a unanimous visual rejection of everything Fraser represented. You're making a terrible mistake, Fraser warned, finally allowing his attorney to guide him toward the door. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Actually, William, Jamal replied calmly, it is. As Fraser departed, the board turned to the more difficult work of addressing the systematic issues his scheme had revealed. For the next 3 hours, they reviewed and approved a comprehensive plan to restructure Skyline's operations, complaint procedures, hiring practices, and executive oversight. Kyle was formally recognized for his courage in coming forward, and despite Fraser's attempts to weaponize his past mistakes, Jamal offered him a new position heading a passenger advocacy unit designed to ensure all travelers received equitable treatment. Your past doesn't define you, Jamal told him privately after the vote. Your choices in the present do. And you chose to do what was right, despite the personal cost. By the time the meeting concluded, the waiting press had grown from a handful of reporters to a substantial media presence. Social media was already buzzing with leaked details of Fraser's financial improprieties, separate from the discrimination scheme. As Jamal prepared to address the assembled journalists, Diana touched his arm. You know this will change everything, she said. Not just for Skyline, but for the entire industry. Jamal nodded. That's exactly the point. Some changes are long overdue. With that, he straightened his tie and walked toward the press conference that would mark not just a personal vindication, but the beginning of a fundamental transformation in how Skyline Aviation, and perhaps the entire airline industry, addressed the persistent reality of racial discrimination. 6 weeks after the boardroom showdown, Jamal Washington stood in Skyline's operations center, watching the monitors tracking flights across the global network he had built. The company had weathered the storm. More importantly, it had emerged transformed. The aftermath of the crisis had been swift and decisive. Fraser, along with Greg Henderson and Stephanie Brooks, had been formally terminated and escorted from Skyline property. The 24 other employees implicated in the discrimination scheme had been removed as well, each case handled individually based on their level of involvement and cooperation with the investigation. Jamal had insisted on fairness even in these difficult personnel actions. Those who admitted their participation and showed genuine remorse were offered the opportunity to undergo extensive retraining in cultural sensitivity education before potentially reapplying for positions. Those who, like Fraser, remained defiant were simply shown the door. The public response had initially been mixed, with Skyline stock fluctuating wildly as investors tried to gauge the long-term implications. But when Jamal held a comprehensive press conference revealing both the discrimination scheme and the corrective measures being implemented, public sentiment began to shift decisively in Skyline's favor. "We failed to live up to our own standards," he had told the assembled media, refusing to sugarcoat the situation. Passengers were treated differently based on their race. Safety protocols were compromised. Trust was broken. For that, Skyline Aviation offers its unreserved apology. Rather than hiding behind corporate doublespeak, Jamal had detailed exactly what had happened and why, outlined the steps taken to address it, and unveiled a comprehensive plan to ensure it never happened again. The Skyline Equality Initiative, as it became known, went far beyond typical corporate diversity programs. It included a complete restructuring of the complaint handling process, with direct oversight from a newly created passenger advocacy department led by Kyle Mitchell. Mandatory quarterly training for all customer-facing staff, with real consequences for non-compliance. A new compensation structure that tied executive bonuses directly to equity metrics across all passenger demographics. A transparent reporting system that publicly shared demographic service quality data on a quarterly basis. A multi-million-dollar compensation fund for passengers who had experienced discrimination, administered by an independent third party. A scholarship program for minority students entering aviation, named in honor of Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman to earn a pilot's license. Most surprisingly to industry observers, Skyline stock had not only recovered but surpassed its previous high as investors recognized the long-term value of Jamal's approach. While some corporate clients in conservative regions had indeed canceled their contracts, they have been more than replaced by companies eager to associate with an airline demonstrating authentic commitment to equity. Now, 6 weeks later, Jamal looked up as Diana Torres entered the operations center, tablet in hand. "The first quarter results under the new protocols," she announced, handing him the device. "I think you'll be pleased." Jamal scrolled through the data. Customer satisfaction scores up across all demographic categories, complaint rates down, employee morale improved, and, most tellingly, a 15% increase in repeat bookings from minority passengers. "It turns out," Diana observed, "that treating all customers with respect is actually good business." Who would have thought? Jamal smiled, remembering his conversation with Fraser about the trillions in minority spending power. Everyone should have thought it. But fear and prejudice have a way of clouding business judgment. "Speaking of judgment," Diana said, lowering her voice, "Fraser's SEC hearing is scheduled for next month. His attorney has reached out about a possible settlement." "No deals," Jamal replied firmly. "What he did wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. He needs to face the full consequences." Diana nodded, unsurprised by his response. On a more positive note, Zoe Jackson's promotion to senior cabin training manager has been finalized. She's already revamping the onboarding curriculum to incorporate what we've learned. As they continued discussing operational updates, Angela appeared with news that Jamal had been anticipating: his flight was ready for boarding. Today would mark his first time flying as a passenger on Skyline since the incident that had exposed the discrimination scheme. An hour later, Jamal settled into Seat 3A on Skyline Flight 237, the same Chicago to New York route, the same seat number. This time, however, he wore no disguise. Dressed in a casual button-down and jeans, he was immediately recognized by the cabin crew. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington," greeted the flight attendant, a young woman whose name tag read Amara. "It's an honor to have you with us today." "The honor is mine," Jamal replied sincerely. "How long have you been with Skyline?" "3 weeks, sir," she answered with a bright smile. "I'm part of the new hiring initiative. I've admired your work for years, it's what inspired me to pursue aviation in the first place." As the flight progressed, Jamal observed the crew's interactions with all passengers, the elderly Asian woman across the aisle, the Middle Eastern family in row 5, the white businessman behind him. Each received the same warm, professional service, the same genuine attention to their needs. When meal service began, Amara placed his tray before him with care. The pasta was perfectly prepared, garnished with fresh herbs and accompanied by a handwritten note, "Thank you for making Skyline a place where everyone belongs." "Your crew," the simple gesture brought unexpected emotion to Jamal's throat. He thought of all the battles fought to reach this point. Not just the recent crisis, but the 20 years of pushing against an industry that had initially seen his skin color as a liability rather than an irrelevant factor in his ability to build a world-class airline. As the plane began its descent into New York, Jamal noticed something that made him smile. Seated in the jump seat near the cockpit was a familiar face. Tyler Johnson, a former flight attendant who had been Zoe's mentor and who had quietly provided supporting evidence during the investigation. Now wearing pilot stripes, he caught Jamal's eye and offered a respectful nod. Later, as passengers disembarked, Amara stopped Jamal briefly. "Sir, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted you to know, my grandfather was one of Skyline's first black maintenance technicians. He faced discrimination every day but stayed because he believed in what you were building. He passed away last year, but he would be so proud to see what Skyline has become now." "What's your grandfather's name?" Jamal asked. "Walter Thompson, sir." Jamal's eyes widened in recognition. "Walter was your grandfather?" "He was one of my earliest hires. He taught me everything I know about aircraft maintenance. In many ways, Skyline exists because of him." Amara blinked back tears. "He kept every article about you, every company newsletter. He always said, that man's going to change this industry someday." "I'm still working on it," Jamal replied with a warm smile. "But now I have help, from people like you, carrying on your grandfather's legacy." As Jamal exited the jetway, he found Kyle waiting for him in the terminal, clipboard in hand, clearly there to conduct one of his new random service audits. "How was the flight?" Kyle asked, falling into step beside him. "Perfect," Jamal answered honestly. Exactly what Skyline should have been all along. Together they walked through the busy terminal, past a newly installed customer service center bearing the Passenger Advocacy Department sign. Inside, a diverse team of representatives assisted travelers with everything from routine rebookings to more complex service concerns. "We've come a long way in 6 weeks, Kyle observed. "We have," Jamal agreed. "But this is just the beginning." He paused, looking out the vast terminal windows where a Skyline aircraft was taxiing for takeoff, its distinctive logo catching the afternoon sunlight. The company had survived its greatest crisis not by compromising its values, but by finally, fully embracing them. "You know," Jamal said thoughtfully, "sometimes it takes seeing your own reflection at its worst to remember who you truly want to be." The plane lifted off, climbing steadily into the clear blue sky. Just like Skyline itself, rising toward a future where dignity and respect weren't just corporate slogans, but lived realities for everyone who came aboard. What would you have done if you were in Jamal's position when you discovered discrimination on your own airline? Comment below with your thoughts. If you believe in equality and standing up against discrimination, please like, subscribe, and share this story with others who need to hear it. Remember, real change happens when brave individuals like Kyle and Zoe speak up despite the risks. Thank you for joining us today, and may we all have the courage to create more just and inclusive spaces wherever we go. Jamal Washington's journey reveals powerful truths about discrimination and leadership. First, that prejudice often hides behind corporate structures, cloaked in professional language and procedures that make it difficult to identify. Second, that true leadership means standing firm on principles even when faced with financial or personal consequences. The story demonstrates how systemic racism requires systematic solutions, not just removing bad actors, but rebuilding systems that allow discrimination to flourish. It shows that accountability must happen at all levels, from flight attendants to board members. Perhaps most importantly, this story teaches us that speaking truth to power requires immense courage but creates ripple effects of positive change. Kyle and Zoe risked their livelihoods to stand against injustice, becoming catalysts for transformation. Finally, Jamal's approach reminds us that fighting discrimination isn't just morally right, it's good business. By creating truly inclusive environments where everyone is treated with dignity, companies don't just avoid liability. They unlock the full potential of diverse talent and customer bases. What would you have done if you were in Jamal's position when you discovered discrimination on your own airline? Comment below with your thoughts. If you believe in equality and standing up against discrimination, please like, subscribe, and share this story with others who need to hear it. Remember, real change happens when brave individuals like Kyle and Zoe speak up despite the risks. Thank you for joining us today, and may we all have the courage to create more just and inclusive spaces wherever we go.